I'd like to now invite our keynote speaker, Dr. Seán Bracken. Seán is a principal lecturer at the University of Worcester in the UK. He's the doctoral program lead for the College of Education, Culture and Society. He also teaches on the PG Cert for Learning and Teaching in Higher Ed, with a particular emphasis on inclusive design. He is a principal fellow of the Higher Education Academy and as part of ADCET Fellowship Program. He is currently an adjunct professor at Curtin University. Seán is also a co-founder of Include and leads a research group called Inclusion by Design at the University of Worcester. So it's with my great pleasure, I'd like to invite Seán up to speak.
Thank you very much. And I'm really hoping that all the gremlins are out of the system at this stage. Thanks so much, Sam. And thanks for laying on the construction site as well next door. So it really is an incredible honor to be here. I've never actually presented in front of so many people before. So hopefully I can retain your interest and challenge for the next hour or so. I'd also like to thank ADCET in particular, and Darlene kind of spotlight for the opportunity to come and to speak with you this afternoon. It's an incredible time for universal design for learning, and anticipatory inclusive design here in Australia. So I'm kind of feeling that it's at the beginning of that wave, that energy. And as the introduction has said, that it's just such a dynamic space and a dynamic time for universal design for learning. So, in terms of next slide. Okay, thank you. Oh,
should be able to just do that.
Yeah, that's the technology. Just to...
There you go. Now.
Okay, very good. So a couple of objectives. I want to share a little bit about myself and how universal design and universal design for learning have informed my professional experiences. I'd like to identify maybe some current Australian, UK and Irish-based contextual legislation, some of the legislation and policy developments driving the interconnections between universal design, authentic learning and assessment, and generative AI. So what a challenge. I really like that kind of, let's throw everything into this 2 days, right? And to propose some strategies to ensure collaborative and systemic institutional and sector changes. And I think that, again, like that, responding to some of the seismic changes that are occurring outside as well as internally within the sector. And I'd like you to kind of keep these challenges and objectives in mind over the next couple of days as well, and certainly to learn from one another's experiences. So a brief biography that did involve actually visiting this university some 38 years ago on my way to Fraser's Antiques, which is a little bit further up Parramatta Road, and which my wife, who's in the audience, pointed out to me yesterday. She said, "You used to work at Antiques, didn't you, when you were in Sydney?" And I said, yeah. And she said, "Have a look across the street." And there it was, Fraser's Antiques, 38 years later. And when I was on my way to Fraser's Antique, I can remember coming into the University of Sydney and thinking, what an august place to be. And I'd really like an opportunity someday to be here. It's only taken me 38 years, folks. So delayed gratification in terms of your dreams and aspirations, stick with it. It will come true for you. Just a couple of different pictures. I began my teaching career in Western Samoa, as it was at the time in Samoa, in 1989, and met Lisa there, and we moved from Samoa back to Ireland, where I did a master's degree in applied linguistics, and then taught at PS 217 public school, where public schools are public, not private schools. but they're open to the public. So it's an elementary school. So that was my background. And it was just after the fall of the Berlin Wall. So there were learners from lots of different cultures, lots of different languages who were coming into the US at the time, and particularly Jewish immigrants who were escaping from the pogroms in the East. And there were that kind of challenge of bringing all of the learners together, I think, was realized to some extent by the city that they lived in, New York City. What an exciting and interesting place to be. And so we used to travel into the city. We built our curriculum around identity. They're becoming, as part of New Yorkers, the opportunity to use the Guggenheim Museum, which I don't know if you've ever been there, but the design of the Guggenheim is in such a way that it's like a shell, but it's accessible. I think before we started to think about kind of concepts of universal design, maybe taking some of those ideas from how nature makes accessibility happen. And that really kind of, that concept of architecture, the concept of design, the concept of inclusivity, linguistic inclusivity, and I've just kind of realized that I've forgotten to introduce myself in terms of how I am featured. Okay, so for everybody, I will backtrack. You'll recognize that this is an element of me. I'll follow different lines of thinking. So I am, I don't know, quite tall, 6'1", balding. Thanks for pointing that one out, Kira. It's like the hair. I've got a graying beard. I'm wearing spectacles, and I have a jacket on. I was told that it's a cultural faux pas to wear one in Australia, but I decided I'm going to wear a jacket at Keynote address as well. I'm wearing a white shirt and red trousers. So thanks for bearing with me in terms of a visual representation of myself. Next to that, next to the photograph of PS 217 in Newkirk at Coney Island Avenues is a photograph of a campus in Vanuatu, where I lived and worked and taught at an École Française, at a French school, and also taught at the University of the South Pacific. And then there's been a few other different kind of pops along the career change, and went back to Ireland and subsequently moved from Ireland to the UK, where I've lived and worked at the University of Worcester for the past 15 years. And congratulations to Seán in terms of being able to pronounce that Worcestershire name. So I worked as on the postgraduate certificate for SENCOs, special educational needs coordinators in maintained schools. And I had that role for 10 years. So it really, I think, attuned me to the kind of concepts of diversity, linguistic diversity, disability, cognitive diversity. And in terms of Worcester as well, it's a city that has a college for secondary school for blind students. I know it's kind of, it's not a very traditional, or not a very, what shall I say, it's sometimes a frowned upon. However, that kind of concept of having a specialist setting can be reassuring for some students with particular manifestations of disability. So a great college, and the university offers that the opportunity for learners to come into the University of Worcester as a widening participating university. That's the University of Worcester. About 35% of our students come from really significantly diverse backgrounds, whether that's first-generation students, disabled students. And in terms of the language that I use disabled students. I know in terms of Australia, you use the language of students with disabilities, and that's the language that's used, obviously, in the United Nations as well. But in the UK, I think purposefully we use the term disabled students because we use the social model of disability. So to a large extent, what we identify is that systems and structures disable particular learners rather than the students having particular disabilities. It is not the they, it is how do we disassemble the barriers which are created for disabled students. So just a little bit of a note on the type of language that I'll be using as well. So the imperative for change, I think we know what it is. In terms of the pandemic, the kind of paradigm shift that occurred at the time. And then when that was over and some of our university leads said, when can we get back to normal? Do you remember that? Having been through one of the most disruptive periods and having learned so much, and particularly in relation to digital accessibility and how, and the affordances of digital learning and how we could advance those, how we could incorporate them into our learning in terms of enabling learning going forward. Obviously, the nature of generative AI over the past kind of 4 years has been hugely disruptive. And it has, with each disruption comes that potential for creativity. So also, I think it would be remiss if I didn't really talk about the crisis of identity in higher education as well. We're getting our foundations kind of chipped at consistently. Justify yourself, and to some extent we have to, because to a large extent we're publicly funded systems, right? So we have to justify the use of that investment in relation to the future development of our communities, the future development of our generations. And I think we can do that. And hopefully, in terms of kind of thinking about our purpose, our core purposes, in terms of our value bases, in how we best serve communities and how we can justify that. And I'll come back to that in relation to assessment in just a little while. So the changing demographics, I want to maybe leave this one just for a second, because it's a good news story to some extent in Australia in relation to disabled learners and their participations in higher education. I don't know that it's good enough, but it's developing. It's going in the right direction. So what we have here is a graph, and it illustrates that from a very low base of 2011, currently in 2013, there's just over perhaps 12.2, 12.3% of the student population who have a declared disability. It's interesting, I think, because across the sector, each university has their own way of determining how students define themselves as disabled. So I think to some extent there's a little bit of a challenge around how best to work with this data. Nonetheless, it is, as I identified, a pretty good news story. And in New South Wales, the numbers are, from 15,000 to 26,000 in terms of growth from 2017 to 2023. 6 years and an increase of 11,000 students. As I said, it's a good news story, but obviously with that comes element of challenge as well. So I think, we had identified earlier on the necessity to think systemically. And when you are working with the senior leaders within your organizations, they'll say, what does the data tell us? So you're probably like lots of you, probably like myself, are qualitative based researchers. Yeah, getting lots of nods from the audience. Yeah, quality is where it's all at. Where's the numbers? I think it's useful for you to familiarize yourself with your data from your own universities to illustrate the increasing number of students who are joining the universities with disabilities. And like that, to then retain your students, because one of the major factors, I think, in higher education in Australia at the moment is the whole retention issue. And it's significant. And I think this is why we hold on to universal design. This is why we hold on to universal design for learning, because I think that a large number of the challenges that are faced by individual students in terms of their retention, having to work while they go to university, holding down jobs as well as their as well as their studies. First generation students, so the sort of cultural shifts that will occur. First Nations, Indigenous, Aboriginal people, not seeing their identities reflected in the assessments, not seeing their identities reflected in the nature of the content of the curriculum or in relation to their identities. So there's huge scope for us, I think, to address some of this retention crisis in relation to how we design and anticipate that inclusive dimension from the outset. So this is a horrid graph. Lots of numbers up there, and I'll own that horridness. But I just wanted to point out in terms of the UK, 23% of students in higher education have a declared disability. I don't know, again, I'd like to lift the lid a little bit more in terms of, well, what are the differences that, that's half that number in Australia. Why is that? Now, does that mean, I think, personally, I think it's perhaps about the different ways in which we're gathering data. And so I'd like to kind of explore that place a little bit more. But also what I want to do is to draw your attention to some of the sort of critical areas. And it's one of them is that one in the center, that mental health conditions, challenge or disorder such as depression, schizophrenia, or anxiety, and how that has year on year been increasing in the UK. And I'd be very surprised if that wasn't the case here in Australia as well. And I think that kind of crisis of mental health is also something that we really have to keep in mind when we're thinking about inclusive design, thinking about anticipatory inclusive design, and thinking about wellness. So getting a policy steer. In the UK, we have the Disabled Student Commitment, which flags sort of critical areas that are going to orient change over the next couple of years. The first, technology in education. The second, inclusive practice, including alternative assessment methods and universal design for learning. And I think those are the three major areas of your conference, which is really helpful for me because it means I could go back and provide them with some answers in relation to how to get things done right from the Australian experience. And learning from altitude in Ireland, I think it is really fascinating. I think that that we are at that cusp of systemic change. And what I'd like to reassure you about is that there are other sectors who have been there. And if you want to talk about this to one particular person, don't all rush to the very back with Mags Flood right there up there, who's sitting in my seat, which is the seat that would normally be next to the door. I was a bolter in primary school. I was a bolter in secondary school. It's like, let me out of here. So Mags, I tapped her on the shoulder. I said, you're sitting in my seat. But if you'd like to know about that kind of systemic change that has occurred, not only within a university, not only within particular regions, but right across the sector, from that policy perspective, that bottom up in terms of the champions that you have, but also that top down in relation to policy and ministerial orientations that have enabled that to happen. But that's after a bit of years of practice. So it's you talking to your politicians and ensuring that the policy lean is on. And it's you talking to your senior leaders within your universities so that they can lean on policymakers as well. But also be reassured about the fact that there are other jurisdictions that have been on this journey. So that international dimension, that capacity to learn from colleagues internally, yes, but also reaching out and having that capacity to learn from external in order to assist in realizing the fact that Australia has signed up to the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and to realize quality education. So in order to respond to this, I've proposed, and I'd like to, again, try and think about this over the duration of the next couple of days. It's a triple helix. And I had to look up. It's like, does a triple helix actually exist? And apparently it does. Hemoglobin is the place where it comes from. So in your any biologists out there, you might be able to kind of recognize this. And I asked AI to kind of generate something for me. I asked Canva, and it came up with this very messy helix. So that's what it generated for me. And I thought, well, this isn't really what I wanted. And then I reflected on that for a minute. It's like, well, actually, maybe it's closer to the truth of how messy educational change and how complex educational change can be. Because, with the senior leader who is here, your your chancellery person or whatever else, they'll have lots of competing agendas pulling on them, right? So it's not quite straightforward. We don't do a logical map and this is going to happen. It is a little bit messy. Nonetheless, I think in terms of responding to the significant challenges, I think if we can intertwine these areas in a complex and complementary way, so thinking about authentic assessment, which is one of your key dimensions for your seminar over the next couple of days, thinking about generative AI, and Canva insisted on calling it generative all, but it is the generative all apparently. So it has taken on a godly status, and obviously the UDL framework as well, or universal design, or anticipatory inclusive design, whichever one you want to choose in relation to thinking about how we